All right. Good morning still. We're going to go ahead and restart the live stream public session for this hearing of the Joint Audits and Evaluation Committee. Next, we're going to proceed to a special review of the Maryland Transportation Authority, and we will bring up Mr. Hook and his legislative audit team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next presentation is our March 2023 special review of electronic tolling issues and customer service processes at the Maryland Transportation Authority. I wanted to present this work for two reasons. The first is that it shows OLA's reaction to members' concerns of statewide issues. In this case, tolling errors at the time were accompanied by a real or perceived lack of appropriate responsiveness and perhaps a bit of denialism by the applicable state agency. And the second is that it demonstrates the capabilities of OLA's data analytics unit. At the last December's JAC meeting, I provided an outline of the data analytics unit, or DAU, which was created in 2019 to fill a void in OLA's data analytics capabilities. And both Vicki Gruber and legislative leadership have been highly supportive of this initiative through staff positions and the purchases of necessary hardware and software. DAU has 6 dedicated team members, and among other responsibilities, DAU assists field audit staff through the creation of automated audit tools, directly advise and assist field audit staff, as you just heard during the MCPA presentation. Plus, DAU is able to independently perform its own projects without the involvement of field audit staff. This tolling special review is the first such standalone independent review issued by the data analytics unit. The review scope was based on concerns of both legislators and the motoring public, but the DAU was responsible for developing the approach and methodology, for performing the work, and formatting the results. Before turning this presentation over to Assistant Audit Director Matt Street, who supervises the DAU and is at the other end of the table with the beard, goatee, whatever, the DAU Audit Manager Dave Fawnstock to my immediate right, and Ian Pontus, the DAU Audit Senior, I want to highlight the magnitude of the undertaking, the task undertaken by DAU. OLA obtained 430 million records for covering a 10-month period related to 115 million unique tolling transactions for over 5 million customer accounts. DAU tested and verified the data, created and performed various data matches, and found that certain Hayden Bridge discount plan customers were improperly charged tolls totaling $435,000. And a further DAU analysis of data for all MDTA toll facilities found another 83,000 customers potentially charged duplicate tolls. I think the takeaway from these findings is that MDTA should periodically perform similar analysis to identify trends and initiate corrective action for any tolling issues that arise. Although not a formal object of the DAU's work, there was public concern over untimely transaction posting to customer accounts, which made tracking and questioning tolling activity difficult for the motoring public. So while we were in there, so to speak, we took a look and did find an improvement in posting from a 279-day average pre-April 2021 to 20 days after that date. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention that MDTA agreed with our findings and reimbursed customers for tolling errors identified by the review. And now I'll turn it over to Dave, Matt, and Ian to provide the specifics.
Morning, co-chairs and members of the committee. My name is Dave Fostock, and I was the manager on our special review. Slide 2, please. MDTA is responsible for managing the state's electronic tolling system and customer service processes at the state's 9 toll facilities, which had toll collections of about $702 million in fiscal year 2022. As Greg mentioned, our review was initiated from significant constituent concerns on tolling issues, as well as concerns OLA received through our fraud, waste, and abuse hotline from Maryland motorists. Our review period included tolls that occurred or were posted to customer accounts from April 2021 to February 2022. Slide 3. Our special review had 2 objectives. Our first objective was to determine if MDTA improperly charged tolls to Thomas J. Hayden Memorial Bridge discount plan customers. Our analysis of Hayden tolls for this objective identified approximately $435,000 in potentially improper tolls related to over 10,000 Hayden discount plan customers that weren't further followed by MDTA. Our second objective was to determine if MDTA improperly charged customers for the same toll twice. Our analysis of all MDTA toll facilities for this objective identified more than 82,000 customers that were potentially charged more than once for a single trip through a toll facility. The related toll charges, which include both the duplicate toll and the correct toll, totaled about $645,000. Moving on to slide 4. To provide a high-level overview of the tolling process, in February 2018, the Board of Public Works approved 2 separate contracts totaling $359.4 million to replace MDTA's prior contractor that provided both the toll collection system and the customer service center. The transition started in May 2019, and MDTA made the final transition to the new tolling system and customer service center in April 2021. Under this new arrangement, there are 2 contractors. First contractor, which we call the tolling contractor, is responsible for the roadside tolling equipment as well as recordation and preparation of tolls. This contractor collects tolling information from vehicles as they pass through the toll facilities, including reading transponders and capturing images of vehicle license plates, as well as resolving any issues with images or incomplete tolls through manual review. The tolling contractor then transmits the prepared tolls to the second contractor, the customer service contractor. The second contractor is responsible for posting tolls to the correct customer accounts and determining the proper toll amount, including applying any related customer discount plans. This contractor is also a service, including addressing customer complaints and determining if tolls should be dismissed. Moving on to slide 5. Returning to our analysis for Objective 1, MDTA provides 2 Hayden discount plans, under which customers pay $20 per year for unlimited trips over the Hayden Bridge for 2-axle vehicles. If the customer transponder associated with the plan is properly mounted in the vehicle and read by tolling equipment, then no toll will be assessed. Thus, if a Hayden discount plan customer is charged a toll, it represents a problem either with the tolling equipment, which we classify as an MDTA error, the customer not having the transponder properly mounted in their vehicle and or not maintaining a positive account balance, which we would classify as a customer error, or a combination of these problems. Moving on to slide 6. For us to identify Hayden Bridge Discount Plus plan customers with potentially improper transactions, we filtered the Hayden Bridge toll transactions to identify tolls that met all 4 of the following criteria. Number 1, customer had an active Hayden Bridge discount plan at the time of the toll. Number 2, a 2-axle vehicle was used in the toll based on the tolling data. Number 3, the same vehicle, based on the license plate, received the Hayden discount on other tolls at the Hayden Bridge on the same customer's account. We applied this criteria assuming that if the vehicle had received a discount on other tolls, there was a higher chance that the customer had their transponder properly mounted and should have received the discount for the tolls in our analysis. And finally, number 4, the discount plan customer did not receive the expected $0 toll when crossing the Hayden Bridge, as would be the case if MDTA had properly applied the discount plan. Now I'll pass it to Ian, who will continue with the results of our analysis.
Good morning, co-chairs and members of the committee. My name is Ian Pontius, and I was the senior auditor and data analyst that worked on the special review. I'm going to be continuing through the results of our review in more detail. So continuing on slide 7. This analysis of the Hayden Bridge tolling data during the 10-month period of our review identified approximately 68,000 potentially improper tolls, totaling $545,000 related to 11,488 discount plan customers. MDTA did not perform a proactive analysis to identify Hayden Bridge discount plan customers that may have been erroneously charged. While $110,000 of tolls were dismissed based on customer-initiated disputes, MDTA had not investigated and dismissed the remaining $435,000 of potentially improper tolls we identified related to 10,474 customers. So continue on slide 8. An example of what our analysis identified would be this significant spike in toll charges assessed to Hayden Bridge discount plan customers during the 3-week period from December 24th, 2020 to January 15th, 2021. During this period, 4,465 of the 11,488 customers were charged tolls totaling $62,595, for which MDTA had only dismissed $12,552 based on customer-initiated disputes. So into slide 9. As part of our analysis, we tested a selection of 37 tolls from the approximately 68,000 potentially improper tolls. This test included identifying if the customer had transponder visible and properly mounted based on the tolling images. Here on the slide, the toll image on the left shows a vehicle with no visible transponder. Therefore, the customer would not be eligible for the discount, while the toll image on the right shows a transponder mounted in the correct location, which we would expect to result in a discounted toll, but did not. Considering on slide 10, for our test of these 37 tolls, our review of the related toll images disclosed that of the 30 that had not already been dismissed, 25 tolls related to 23 customers should have been dismissed by MDTA, but were not. These 25 tolls were split into two groups, with toll images either clearly showing the customer's transponder was visible and properly mounted, or toll images being insufficient to verify that the transponder was properly mounted. So continuing on slide 11. So moving on to our objective 2, we determined if MDTA improperly charged customers for the same toll twice by first separating potentially improper tolls into different scenarios based on what caused the charge to be improper. These scenarios were identified through consideration of the complaints received through our fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, as well as our overall review of the data. The 3 scenarios we identified are as follows. Scenario A, where the customer is charged twice for 2 tolls with identical or nearly identical information. Scenario B, where the customer was charged twice, but because MDTA misapplied a different person's toll to the customer's account. And scenario C, where the customer was charged for 2 overlapping tolls for a single trip on the intercounty connector. Each of these scenarios intrinsically requires sets of multiple tolls, which we call toll groups. We would expect one toll in each toll group to be the legitimate toll and the remaining ones to be erroneous. In this case, because they're duplicates of the legitimate toll or someone else's toll entirely. Our analysis included a detailed review of the tolling account and image data for each tested toll group in MDTA's source systems. So continuing on slide 12, based on our analysis, we identified approximately $645,000 in tolls comprised of 135,495 toll groups with potentially duplicate or misapplied tolls related to 82,847 customers across all MDTA toll facilities. Our random test of 65 of these customers disclosed that 62 of the customers, or 95% of those that we tested, were improperly charged as part of one of our 3 scenarios, highlighting the accuracy of our analysis. Next slide, please. So the following are some examples from each of these scenarios. So this is an example of a test item from our scenario A, where the customer was charged twice for 2 tolls with identical or nearly identical information. Our review of the toll detail and MDTA systems confirmed that the toll facility, toll time, and vehicle identified by license plate were identical for both tolls. The images supporting both tolls are also essentially identical, as can be seen from these 2 toll images on the slide. So these images on slide 14 are from a scenario B test item where the customer is charged twice, but this time because MDTA misapplied a different person's toll to the customer's account. In this case, the Mercedes, which was labeled as vehicle A, was the customer who was charged for both their own toll and the Subaru's toll labeled as vehicle B. This happened because the customer's transponder was misapplied to the Subaru that drove in close proximity to the customer's Mercedes. And slide 15, this final example is from our scenario C, where a customer is charged twice for a portion of a single trip on the intercounty connector. Intercounty connector tolls are based on a constructed toll trip, which accounts for the customer's starting and ending toll gantry points. Tolls we categorized under scenario C represent instances where MDTA's system failed to construct an intercounty connector toll correctly. Instead splitting one toll into multiple tolls, where portions of both tolls overlapped each other. As shown on the map on slide 15, customers were charged for a correct toll, seen in blue, but were also erroneously charged for a second toll, seen in red. This resulted in the customer being charged twice for the overlapping portion of their trip.
Slide 16. So in summary, we believe, as Greg mentioned, we believe MDTA should proactively perform similar data analysis periodically to ensure the continued accuracy of its systems and processes and the appropriateness of toll charges. Corrective actions taken by MDTA regarding tolling accuracy will be subject to review during our next fiscal compliance audit scheduled to begin in 2024. This concludes our presentation, and we would be happy to take any questions from the committee.
I would like to add one further comment that the Data Analytics Unit is one of the founding members of the National State Auditors Association Data Analytics Work Group, and they presented this report several months ago to the national work group, and it was incredibly well received based on feedback. So,
So thank you to your team. A few of us had an opportunity to visit the data analytics work group last month. We're very impressed by your work and certainly appreciate the findings here and the recommendations as well. I wanted to begin with one question about, I was doing some simple math, I think, based on your presentation. Can you tell us how much in total your efforts have resulted in refunds back to state drivers?
I think the specifics about the exact total that MBTA indicated that they refunded would be better directed towards the agency.
All right. Well, I'm going to help giving you some credit here. It looks like based on my back of the envelope math, your recommendations have resulted in over $1 million that has been refunded back to drivers of the state. So, I think on behalf of those drivers, we want to thank you for your efforts. Those were really well timed and also well thought through, and certainly appreciate your efforts on those lines.
That might be a double counting on the one number. It's still a lot, but that might be a double counting of one of the numbers. The duplicate might have to be divided in half.
Sure, I can help clarify.
Yeah, well, let's just real quick.
Yeah,
not to take credit away from us, but I want to be correct.
The duplicate portion, the 645,000. What we mean by it includes the correct toll and the duplicate toll. It's both in those toll groups set. What happens? It can get very complicated about how much an individual is charged on a given toll trip. So, for example, if your vehicle is charged twice, it might be a combination of the one toll was charged based on the Easy Pass rate because they call it the transponder, and the second toll was caught by the license plate, which is going to be charged at a higher rate. There can be additional factors as well where the duplicate charge could be more than the correct charge. For example, if the individual did have a discount plan, the correct toll would be that discounted rate, and then the duplicate may be, an image toll rate, which is much higher.
So the bottom line is that duplicate number has the real toll and the erroneous toll in it. That's all. So maybe $680,000, $750,000.
All right, so over $500,000.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just quick, is this a software problem or a MDTA problem?
We saw both. So for the Hayden Bridge example, that during that spike period, we saw that in our analytics and we presented that to the agency. And they looked at their records and they said, yes, we were aware that there was a equipment malfunction at the Hayden Bridge during that time period where that spike occurred. They thought that they had addressed all of the improper toll charges and they had already refunded the customers due to that malfunction. But what we found based on the analysis was they had not covered all of the improper charges. So they didn't expand their review in that case to say, we've got this tolling equipment issue. Did we truly make all of our customers whole on that?
Okay, is it a software problem or a hardware?
So that's a follow-up, a problem in how they're following up on issues identified through the tolling equipment. On the software issue side, as an example, that scenario C that Ian went over with these overlapping tolls on the ITC, that could be addressed through software. And the agency can speak more to the specifics about how they have their software edit controls set up, but it truly cannot be possible for someone to be receiving two tolls. It should not be possible for one single trip on the ICC. They should never be charged for two tolls for that one single trip. That could be detected through software.
Are there more than one vendor that provides that type of service?
Yes, in fact, MBTA they have two separate vendors. They have the one for the roadside systems and the one for the
You mean nationwide?
customer service.
Nationwide, yeah. I'm just saying.
I thought we used one of the most common vendors.
Trent.
Go ahead. Don't.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of vendors out there that do this, and Transportation Authority is using one of those.
My problem with it is when we look at MDTA, everybody wants to blame MDTA for something that might not be their issue. It's their issue because they have the vendor, but I think, is there anything in the contracts that stipulate these issues and actually bring to light? Because I know I have a lot of people doing the same scenario. I have it there every time. I'm thinking, and I get charged differently each time. And that isn't an MDTA problem so much as it's a vendor problem that's not doing it. And do we have the best of class?
Even the best tolling systems out there are going to have errors. Things happen all the time, whether it's hardware or software, as you mentioned. There's plenty of metrics built into those contracts about how quickly they have to adjust problems, how quickly they have to apply, the tolls to customer accounts, and then how they have to notify Transportation Authority when there's problems and when those problems get corrected. So one easy thing that Transportation Authority could do is once they know about a problem, they're monitoring it. The vendors correct the problem, whether it's hardware or software, and then they have, Transportation Authority working with their vendors could go back and look at the tolls that occurred during that period of time and see if there was any erroneous transactions.
That use these systems, I would suppose we shouldn't have many vendor problems left then, but we do.
Yeah, I know that they would say, and I think any state that has a tolling facility is going to say that no tolling system is perfect. So
Okay.
they would love to work all the time, but it's an IT system, and IT systems have issues.
I will say, from my own personal use, I use this Fort McHenry Tunnel toll plan every day. I do work at the warehouse, and ever since they put the overhead gantries in right at the entrance to the southbound, I guess the tunnels on southbound, every toll's been $1 for, which is correct. Prior to that, when they used to have still the toll booths with the other readers, I was getting errors. But since then, it's been perfect. And I received a statement yesterday, and they were all $1 for. Congrats.
Smith. Oh,
End it off. Thank you. I was just wondering whether, you note that you're going to look at or review the corrective actions of the tolling authority in your next audit scheduled to begin in 2024. So do we know, in fact, that the money or the excess tolls for the double tolling has actually been refunded to customers?
They identified that in the response. They said that we gave them all the data related to the tolling errors. They went back, looked at it, and they identified in their response that they've refunded the customers. Regarding the dollar amount and which customers, they would be in the best position to answer that.
But in your test of the universe that you determined could possibly have been double tolled, you found 95% were.
For our random test of
Right.
65, 62, 95% were
Right.
confirmed.
And we'll hear from the agency about how this is not happening now, right?
I
Yes.
would like to think so. Yes.
Okay.
assuming no other questions, I think that's actually a good segue. Thank you to Greg and the audit team. And thank you again for the great work that your team is doing, the data analytics. So I am now going to call up from the Maryland Transportation Authority, Acting Executive Director Percy Dangerfield, and Chief Financial Officer Deborah Sharpless. All right, good afternoon. Joint chairmen and members of the committee. Want to take time to thank you for the opportunity to expand on the presentation by the Office of Legislative Audits. We truly do believe it's a partnership with the organization, and we think all these activities will help us be better. So for the record, my name is Percy E. Dangerfield. I'm the Acting Executive Director for Maryland Transportation Authority, and I'm joined today at the table by Ms. Deb Sharpless, who's our Chief Financial Officer. Recognizing the committee has a full agenda, we will be brief with our remarks and we'll address the matters that were presented. So when you consider the volume of transactions that occur each year, the high-speed vehicles are traveling when toll transactions are captured, the system complexity and which comes with providing customers with modern functionality and the options they want, as well as human element error. Some errors will occur. So I think the auditors did acknowledge. But MDTA leadership is committed, and we place the utmost importance on integrity, accuracy, and customer service. And should an error occur, we have systems in place to address any errors and/or customer concerns. Our goal is 100% accuracy. So from an industry perspective, a tolling system for error rate at 0.1% or below 0.1% cannot be procured, and therefore our approach is always striving for 100% accuracy is a layered additional redundant safeguards onto our toll systems. So MDTA maintains a robust statistical sampling-based quality assurance and quality control program
which includes multiple layers of verification, automated alerts, business intelligence analytics, and a system safety nets to achieve the highest degree of accuracy from its tolling system. So at this time, I'll turn the floor over to Deb to address the findings in our quality management program moving forward.
Thank you, Percy. Before focusing on the actions we took to strive to achieve our 100% goal of accuracy, please allow me just a minute to frame the potential incorrect toll transactions identified. And I think it'll also help address one of the questions that was asked. So OLA's request from Caption TransCore, that's our two vendors, roadside and back office, provided 123 million unique transactions totaling $520 million. These transactions occurred between April 13th, 2021 and February 13th, 2022. Either the transaction occurred or the transaction was posted during that time period. If you recall, we transitioned to the new system in April 2021. So their period started right when we transitioned. When we transitioned, we also had a significant backlog of transactions. I hope in my life I never have to say the word backlog again. But we did have so, and you know, there multiple people can think we should have handled things differently. There's some groups of people that think we should have flushed all of those transactions right away, one time. Other people say, no, I needed you to meter them. I needed time to pay. We opted in the metering approach. And the backlog contributed to this time period being particularly difficult. One of the things that toll systems need is they need transactions to be processed in the correct order. You know, yesterday's transactions gets processed before today's transactions. The backlog contributed to challenges like that. That's one of the things that caused the split trip issue. So that's the time period that we're talking about. And so when OLA received all of this data, you know, one of the things that it did just amaze me how much data we were talking about. I always think about data in terms of megabytes. You know, this was 1.5 million megabytes, so 1.5 terabytes of data that was exchanged between our two agencies. So next, what they did is, to credit to their analytics team, they took that data and analyzed and ran it against basically like, if I trend the data, where does it look like I'm more likely to have an issue? That's the Hayden Bridge, where we have the 3-week time period where we had an equipment malfunction. And so then when they did the testing, it was during those 3-week period where their data led them to look at those 3 weeks. So I hopefully that addresses your question about that testing. So after, you know, that, you know, we have, you know, roughly, you know, $758,000 in potential charges. Now, the potential charges, they're inclusive of Hayden Bridge customers whose accounts were in an inactive status, meaning they owed money at other toll facilities. At that time, a business rule that we had is, in order to receive the Hayden discount, you needed to have an account in an active status. OLA disagreed with that policy, and so these numbers are inclusive of that. Now, we have since changed that policy. Today, the policy is, if you have a transponder and it's red, you will get the zero toll, $20 unlimited tolls. But at the time, that was not the business rule. These numbers are also inclusive of customers in which there was not an image of red. You know, like our goal when we take images, we need to capture the license plate. Okay, so some images that you couldn't see the transponder because it was night, it was dark. You could read the license plate, not the transponder. And then it's also some include scenarios where they are in fact not duplicates, and we provided some examples of that. And so we appreciate the auditors where they labeled them as potential, because it is very labor intensive to go through and review each individual account. And it's for that same reason that MDTA has in fact credited all potential errors, not only during this audit period, during this time period, but we went back to March of 2020 right up to current. And so I think now if we kind of move on to, well, what do we do to ensure accuracy? We maintain a robust statistically, based sampling. We have 3 independent quality control and quality assurance groups. One's managed by CAPS, one by TransCore, and one by MDTA. The units continuously sample, test, monitor, and analyze trips and transactions through all stages of a transaction's life cycle. We are part of the National EasyPass Interagency Group, and as such, several elements of our lane side equipment is certified through their independent, rigorous testing. We have other examples would be duplicate filters, and this is one of the so before a transaction leaves one system, comes into another, we have duplicate filters to check when the trip is being constructed. That is on the CAP side. When it's being transmitted, the handoff between CAPS and TransCore, and then when it's being processed. And so now we've also layered on to that some analytics that I'll talk about some more in a second. The sequencing for the duplicates that were identified by OLA, those filters weren't effective because of the ordering, because of the look at back time. And that this audit has proved how the analytical work layered on top of these filters is a better strategy. Other things that we do to ensure accuracy. We have dual optical character recognition engines. That's supported by manual review. We analyze transactions at a lane level because of the volume and the patterns. You can see trend analysis. Examples of vehicle classification and transponder read accuracy was included in a joint chairman's report that MDTA issued in January 2013. During that study, we were asked to look at 1 week time period. We covered 2.4 million toll trips valued at 10.8 million and found that the system is accurate on a consistent basis. But that joint chairman's report, you can see the analysis. We actually included our graphs inside that report. Another thing, annually, the lane side receives a SOC 1 Type 2 audit by independent auditors, and the back office receives a SOC 1 Type 2, as well as a SOC 2 Type 2 audit, by independent auditors. And the reports have consistently showed that their system controls and trust principles were effectively working. 100% of all video citation images are manually reviewed. So there are some examples of the different types of things we do to ensure quality. We appreciate the auditors' work, have refined some of the analytical tools that they have done to become even better. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. And I should have mentioned at the outset, I know the agency suffered a tragedy earlier this fall. We wanted to just say that, our thoughts are with you. And I know it's been a tough transition. So we appreciate you being here. I did have just a couple of questions. So I guess I want to sort of hone in a little bit on the duplicative tolling on sort of scenario, the third piece. Obviously, we looked at the Hayden Bridge, we looked at the response time it took to actually update people's accounts, and then obviously the sort of duplicative tolling. And I guess I was a little concerned looking at this because as I looked at the scenarios that that the OLA team put together, there's really only one scenario in here where I sort of feel like it's the driver's fault. It's the scenario where the driver is split between two lanes, where obviously if you're going between two lanes, you're going to get flagged by two transponders. But almost everything else in here, somebody's tailgating you. There's a motorcycle that comes in behind you. There is an MDTA police vehicle that happens to come in behind you, or you're literally just driving on the ICC.
All those scenarios are things that you as the driver, you're following the law, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And if you did not look at your account, you wouldn't have known that you had been, I mean, and I'll admit, I have an Easy Pass account. I don't check it very often. Half the time I forget what my password is. And when I do check it, I have to go in and reset it. So I don't look at it very often. I just sort of assume things are correct. So what have you all done? I mean, it sounded like you've now moved more toward an analytical model, but how do I know that if I go through a toll gantry later this afternoon and somebody's tailgating me, that your system hasn't charged my car twice now?
So the finding with the duplicates, so not that hate them, the other finding. So the causes of it. So one was split trips on the ICC, and that the largest driver of that. Sure. So imagine I go through 5 gantries, and my trip is split into 2 separate trips. One trip is 4 gantries, one trip is 5 gantries. I mean, not gantry number 5. Okay. The ICC has a minimum toll. So if that one gantry was less than 40 cents, the customer would be charged the minimum toll. And so when you sum the 2 together, it's greater than what the charge would have been had we just charged them once for the entire trip. Okay. We're in normal operations. That does not happen. It would have to be, it's something we monitor regularly, is we don't build a trip until 100% of the transactions are received and processed at one time. And so in a situation where we had any split trips there, we had formed a transaction and there were some stragglers in the backlog that then came through and were separated from the primary.
When you say split trip, so if somebody gets off, let's say their entire trip on the ICC going from 95 to 270 is 10 miles. They get off after 4 miles, then they get back on to continue the rest of their trip. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
No, imagine it's a continuous trip.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Not where you got off and you got back on.
Right.
Okay. If you get off and you get back on, the system has a certain amount of time.
Right.
Okay.
So then I guess I'm still not
so-
following this. It's
so-
multiple gantries.
Yes. In between each interchange is a gantry. And so under a perfect situation, someone has a transponder mounted and that transponder is read under every single gantry. Okay. Sometimes it's not. The biggest offender is when someone's waving their transponder. They're holding it up. Right. So if we read the gantry, let's say on gantry 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it was an ITOL, and I'll explain that one second, in the 5th gantry. That 5th gantry and the first 4 were separated. Okay. An ITOL is, you hear us all the time say, please register your license plates. Any of your vehicles on your account, register your license plate. That is because if there isn't, for some reason your transponder did not read, we will charge your Easy Pass account based on your license plate. So that's what's happened, is that under normal circumstances, all transponder read, image read, transactions, they're all processed at one time and complete trips are formed. When transactions didn't come in, then we had some literally stragglers, and that's one of the challenges in the toll side is the volume that you're talking about. And I completely agree. Even if we're talking about, potentially, $500,000, that's still a lot of money. It's also in relation to billions of dollars. And so when we're striving to have 100% accuracy, it's impossible for a tolling system to do that. And the only way we can get because the tolling system is going to be 99.9, but that 0.01%, you apply that to large volumes, it's a lot of customers, and that's the layering. So that
Get to the fundamental point here. Has the split issue do you have a system in place now that addresses that?
Yes.
Okay. And how about the other pieces? because in the response we got back from Secretary Wiedefeld, he's the chair in this instance, didn't really address, again, if I'm going through a toll and somebody tailgates me, am I getting?
Under normal the system normally, right? If someone is tailgating you, if someone is changing lanes, if someone is driving on the shoulders, any of those, the transponder, it's to read, the trips are to be separated, that it's, unfortunately, people tailgate each other. Some people have strategies of changing lanes under gantries, like, that they think that's going to cause a different outcome. But those events, should not trigger these, and normally they would not. A transponder association issue is highly rare.
In the accounts that viewed.
So it comes back to they utilize analytics, right? We had the 1.5 terabytes of data that came in, analyzed the data, and said, these transactions don't meet my criteria. Let me test them. And so that's why when you say, I see an anomaly right here, these 3 weeks, there's an anomaly happen. Their sampling was during that time period, not across the whole time period of the data, the transactions. That's why you're seeing a higher rate.
Seem like, so that I guess I understand that on the Hayden Bridge piece, they looked at a very specific time frame. So you're telling me that.
So it's the same thing with, so they, for the entire time period, for the duplicate transactions, when OLA went through their criteria, they said, this was our criteria. What that means is they wrote a script that searched the 1.5 terabytes of data to find transactions that meet that criteria. And whatever the outcome was of those results, that's what they then sample. And that's not that we do that. That is part of our regular process now. I mean, this with COVID and all, it was a challenging implementation. So we don't fault them for their approach. It's a strategy to use resources wisely, because it's impossible to look at any large volume of transactions. It's like it would be a needle in a haystack.
I can't say that I'm super satisfied with that. I guess more broadly, who is responsible when there is a software mistake? Are the contractors responsible for refunding tolls, or does that come out of MDTA?
If a customer is mischarged, then the contractor is responsible for fixing the system. The contractor is responsible for taking the actions to correct the customer's account, but they are not charged the toll because the toll was incorrect. So we're making the toll the right amount. If they took an action that prevented us from collecting revenue, then they can be responsible for lost revenue.
So all of this refunded during that 3-week period under the Hayden Bridge issue, would that have just been MDTA?
Yes, because the premise is, if we take the auditor's assumption, anyone with a transponder should pay a zero toll. The customers charged a toll, therefore we refunded them. We would not charge the vendor for a toll that shouldn't have been charged.
Is the vendor responsible for the staffing issues or essentially the overhead costs that it takes for the agency to fix something like that?
No, they have KPIs that they're responsible for, and key performance indicator. The system has to be 99.9% accurate. If they fail to reach we measure that. If they fail to obtain that level of accuracy, then they're assessed a disincentive. In other words, their invoice is reduced.
And then the last question that I have is there a certain number of complaints that you get that would trigger a review for you to go back and look at certain time periods? If you weren't sampling it regularly?
I mean, we are sampling regularly, but the call center, if they started to get similar calls, they would, we call it JIRA ticket. They would open a ticket for it to be looked into.
And would that engender the MDTA team and the contractors to review to do a sample?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But the customer adjustments that we do, they are coming from the analysis and the quality management and quality controls. The calls, they're not coming in clustered with similar comments, you know, but that's rare.
Okay. I think I would like to follow up on some of the other duplicative issues, but I don't want to drag this on forever. So I think I saw Delegate Plakovich Carr.
Mr. Chair. Here we go. Just a quick question. If a customer finds an error on their report, how long do they have to get that corrected? Is there any time frame beyond which they wouldn't be able to get the reimbursement?
We haven't established a deadline that if the toll's incorrect, then we're going to correct it. And
Delegate Johnson, I think I saw you.
Chair. I was looking through the auditor's report and it has 10,474 HATEM discount plan customers that warrant further follow-up by MDTA. And then in another category, 82,847 customers that were potentially charged more than once for a single trip. So did you go back and look at just the ones that were the discount plans? Did you look at just the samples from the auditors? What my question is, did everyone who got overcharged get reimbursed or their plan corrected? And the ones that took a picture of their license and they got a paper bill and sent a check in, did they get looked at and reimbursed?
so for the HATEM, let's start with the HATEM. If someone received a paper bill, a notice of toll due, then that means that there was not a transponder in the vehicle, you know, that we detected. Okay. And it also means that customer's license plate was not recorded on their account. Okay. So if someone in fact had a transponder in their vehicle and their license plate was not reported on their account, we would not know unless the customer called us. That's the one scenario that we will not know, because we won't know because their license plate isn't reported on the account. And so for the HATEM, what we did is looked at every single Easy Pass account. Anyone that had a HATEM plan, regardless of if their account was in a active status, meaning they didn't know tolls, and they had a HATEM plan, if they were charged a toll, we credited them from March 2020 to present.
And so there were no other glitches other than just the HATEM plan? So you didn't look at anything else, just the HATEM plan on the HATEM bridge?
The HATEM plan, what do you mean by anything else?
We talked about, as Delegate Solomon was talking about, Chair Solomon, about two cars going in too close together, about several different things that could pop up over.
For that, for those different criterias, we have written, I believe it's 5 different scripts specifically to duplicates. We had generated those scripts. for any potential scenario. And regardless of what toll facility it was, we have credited customers' accounts from March 2020 to present. And so now today in the system, beyond those 3 filters, those 3 duplicate filters, periodically we run these scripts to catch any non-standard transaction, something unique happened, and I think the last time we ran it, we caught 8 transactions, but those 8 were credited.
It's perfect. Yesterday coming down, it didn't read my transponder. So, things happen, but I just wanted to make sure that we're trying to get back, refund everybody that got overcharged for any issue.
Yes.
And so just want to add to the member's point and also to the chairman. I've been in this role, the acting role, for roughly a little over 2 months now. And one of the things I was immediately involved in was taking a look at the work teams that Ms. Sharpless is talking about. There's several work teams that have already been established. And as you mentioned before, it's a partnership between MDTA staff and our vendors. These work teams actually meet weekly. Again, there's 3 different scenarios. They do have scripts, and they are identifying when appropriate glitches in the systems and refunds and credits are being applied. So this is I can attest that this is a priority of the organization. And these folks have been working every week to identify these things and move forward. So again, as we mentioned before, no system is perfect, but our goal is 100% accuracy. So that's what we've been working toward.
I don't see any further questions.
One follow-up question. It seems like this is very, even in describing what your solutions are, is that it's very complaint driven. And that if someone is not monitoring their own bill that they're receiving and when exactly they're driving through, and it seems like there could be a delay of days between when it actually hits their account and for them to be able to see that and to call back in, that they would simply be charged and they would maybe never know. And that it seems like even though the OLA folks have used analytics to be able to identify these charges, I get no sense that the department is using these types of analytics proactively to refund these charges based on even some of the work that OLA has done.
That's incorrect. Transactions are posted no longer than 96 hours. We're in a normal operations now. The backlog has been resolved. So most Easy Pass transactions are going to post immediately, definitely within 24 hours. All transactions, this is one of the KPIs, is to post within 96 hours. We run analytics all the time. It's a consistent, and so do our customers, do they call, and say, this is not my vehicle? Yes, that happens occasionally. But what we see from our sampling, from the analytics that we do, the list that Percy was talking about that we meet weekly on and walk through, 95% of those are because of the work that we did to identify something that was a concern that we dug into and proactively are adjusting a toll.
And Chairman, I would just add that that is correct. When the system was first established, when we first went through the transitional period, as Ms. Sharpless had mentioned, just COVID and the backlog, it was an opportunity for the system to really catch up to proactively identify those things. So a lot of the information we were getting or the concerns were from complaints, as you mentioned before. But the organization has taken a turn. They have established these work groups and work teams. They do meet regularly. It is analytics driven. That helps us be proactive. But in the event, we still work with any customer that has any issue or concern that they've identified, and we do have a process in place to try to work with them for resolution.
Because I just wanted to follow up on what Chair Solomon had said earlier, and I think in one of the responses was that that there would be additional sampling done if there was an uptick in calls and complaints coming back in. So it seemed as though this was very complaint driven, that the proactiveness in identifying them without relying on complaints being called back in from drivers is not entirely there.
So I understood the question to say, if we had multiple customers calling, saying my toll is inaccurate for the same reason, would we investigate? And we would investigate. I also said that that would be very rare, that the analytics is where we can identify if there's an area of concern, you know, like classifying a vehicle. Is, you know, take the left lane, I'll just simplistic of the left lane, right? We trend the classification of vehicles. If it should be practically 100% two axle vehicles. If we see a blip there, we're going to go and we're going to dive into that and look and say, did the toll equipment malfunction? You know, because we expect two axles in the left lane. That's the type of analytics that we have incorporated as part of our daily operations.
Okay. Delegate Watson.
Thank you. It certainly sounds like you've come a long way from where we were, thank goodness. But I wanted to ask you, just because I don't know, we have a tolling account, but my husband handles it. And do you have an option for paper statements?
You have an option for paper statements. You email that we allow customers to designate their preferred method.
So you have a system where you email, or you have an option where you email people who have the transponders each time they're charged?
We just launched our mobile app, and one of the functionalities that we are moving close to is for customers to be able to opt in and receive a notification.
Okay, so that is a function that they can do on their mobile phone.
Yes, it would be a push message to them.
Okay.
We are also working towards, it's called a feedback transponder, trying to give customers two choices. And basically the transponder makes a sound, you know, pleasant sound when your account's in active status, a negative, you know, louder, less positive sound if your account is not. Anybody with an Easy Pass account and they give us our email, we send email notices when their accounts are if their account's negative.
Okay. So it sounds like you're going to have a system where someone can be notified immediately if they've had a charge on their card.
On their account.
On their account, the transport. Okay. So the analytics reduces greatly, I'm sure, the margin of error, but it's not going to catch everything.
That's right.
So it's very dependent on complaints, as Senator Lamb said. So I would think that if we can educate consumers about how to monitor these with the new ways that you're providing, that would be helpful.
Yes. And customers can go into their account electronically and see their transactions. They don't need to wait for their statements.
They can do that.
Yes.
How many around this table do that?
Agreed. So,
Yeah.
so if they opt in for the push notices.
Right. I think that's one of the answers. Thank you.
Good for being here. Thank you. I think we're going to call Greg back up to the table to an update on the Maryland Department of Labor Unemployment Insurance Division, Part 1 and 2.
Thank you. By the way, Debbie worked for me as an audit senior when I was an audit manager. She's from OLA. Am I ready to go? Well, there's no slides for me, right? Okay, go. Oh, I'm sorry. The Maryland Department of Labor Division of Unemployment Insurance, referred to as DUI, is an agency that arose to great significance during the COVID pandemic. A full presentation of the results of our two then recent audit reports of DUI occurred during the December 2022 JAC hearing. Prior to receiving an update today of the implementation status of the DUI corrective steps from MDL, the Maryland Department of Labor, the co-chairs requested I provide a brief recap of the audit reports. Two issues affected our audits. In addition to COVID's impact that greatly increased unemployment insurance activity and required the expansion and modification of various DUI operations, DUI finalized implementation of its new information system, Beacon, which further impacted its operations. Historically, OLA used to conduct one audit of DUI, but as described in the actual audit reports and to better focus our audit effort, OLA divided the work into two separate audits. Specifically, DUI administers the state's unemployment insurance program that includes two primary responsibilities. One, collecting unemployment insurance tax contributions from employers, and two, processing applications for and dispersing unemployment benefit payments. And accordingly, our audits were titled Part 1, Unemployment Insurance Tax Contributions, which were dated May 4th, 2022, and included 6 findings. And then Part 2, Unemployment Benefits, which was dated November 15th, 2022, and included 13 findings, of which 4 were repeated from the prior DUI audit report, and will be subject to follow-up through the JCR process this year. Or actually, the last year's JCR withheld $100,000 from MDL pending correction of those prior repeat findings. We'll be monitoring that in the near future. Detailed in the Part 1 report are 3 issues related to an absence of controls over employer contributions, including the failure to reconcile accounts that contributed to large dollar differences in recorded activity, no verification that unemployment tax collections were appropriately deposited since September 2020, and a lack of regular data matches to ensure that Maryland employers registered with DUI as required by state law. We also noted a lack of aggressiveness in pursuing delinquent accounts of employers who had not contributed sufficient funds. Details in our Part 2 report included the absence of certain critical data matches, comprehensive procedures to detect claims from foreign internet protocol addresses, and verifying that applicants who were full-time students were actually eligible to receive benefits. Additionally, there were 5 findings under the claims processing heading, which included duplicate payments and untimely verification of income reported by certain benefit applicants. And furthermore, there were 4 cybersecurity related findings, which were redacted from the public report. And then finally, as disclosed in the November 22 report, or Part 2 report, OLA concluded that collectively MDL DUI's accountability and compliance level was unsatisfactory. Previously, MDL DUI provided a status report to OLA as of August 1st, 2023, which described certain actions that DUI had taken to address the audit findings and noted that it implemented the audit recommendations for 7 of the findings, but expected 11 of the 12 remaining recommendations to be implemented by December 2023. And with that, I will turn it over to MDL for an update on the success of its corrective action.
Woo, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair Lamb and Chair Solomon. And thank you to the audit team. I'm joined here by Lakeeb, who speaks, our Acting Assistant Secretary and Unemployment Insurance, and Prahalad Patil, the Director of Beacon. We appreciate the committee's interest in this program, and I, as the exhaustive history on these audits have shown, there's still a lot that needs to be corrected about unemployment insurance. We're in the process of improving our systems, and I want to say over the past year, since I've come on board, and I'm joined here by Deputy Secretary Jason Perkins Cohen, we've really dug in a lot with the team to really understand why there were some of these shortcomings. And I know, I'm happy to answer questions about the specifics of the findings, but I think, underlying this is a lack of confidence in the system and a question of are we really addressing these problems and are they going to recur again? And this is what I can say thus far. Obviously, there was pandemic, but I want to emphasize one of the key things that happened here is there was not only the migration from the old system to the new system, we also temporarily stood up a system called One Stop to pay pandemic unemployment assistance. And that's in a lot of the outstanding findings are about reconciling what happened in those months in the last half of 2020 with what we, with our current systems. And part of the difficulty is, you reap what you sow. If you stand up a whole new system overnight and prioritize speed and efficacy over cross-matching and accounting, that's the situation we're facing today. So I want to underscore, we have adopted a lot of the findings of the audit findings were incredibly helpful to us to improve a lot of our processes. We have many other process improvements we're working on. Of the outstanding findings, and we had hoped to have them all resolved by this time, we have not been able to resolve all of them, unfortunately, but we have a path to resolution and a timeline for each of them. And I'll go through them in a little bit more detail. I want the committee to rest assured, many of those issues are ones that are, cabined to that specific moment in history. And so it's us still trying to clean up what happened to that time. But going forward, those issues are not an issue in the present day, right? Like, for example, around debit cards. That was a certain kind of process we used at that time. And we're in a situation with that particular bank where we're still unable to get the data released. So we cannot resolve to the outstanding findings. Or other processes like cross-matching, we've fixed those issues again. So going forward, we will not have that problem. But at that time in history, we did have a lot of things that were suspended and frankly didn't work as well as they could have. So with that, maybe we can turn to the next slide. So, it's just saying that these are 13 of the findings are fully resolved. 6 still are in progress. And I wanted to provide an update on where we are on those. As I did mention, 2 of them are related to our banking vendor dealing with funds that were frozen that were supposed to be transferred. As you may recall, there was, significant amounts of fraud at this time in 2020, and it was difficult for the agency to always understand what was going on. And banks have a separate responsibility with respect to accounts, and they cannot directly provide us with a lot of the information because the way we paid the benefits is individuals created accounts and debit cards were paid out of those accounts, but the banks have a separate responsibility to those individuals as account holders. And so we're still in negotiations with Bank of America around the banking vendor issues, and that's a significant number of funds. That's 2 of the findings. 2 of them we expect to be resolved very soon, and 2 I think are still going to take more time. I'm going to be there later in the year. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these findings, but of course, welcome, if the committee wants to jump in with questions at any time. The first one is some of the issues around the manual accounting system and reconciliation. So on this finding, I first want to note that this doesn't reflect our current processes, right? These, like from October 2020 through present, employer deposits are being verified daily in our modernized agency system. What this is about is looking at the manual review, and a lot of these files were in paper at that time, and of course were sent into the building where no one was there. And we only had limited access at that time. So we are going back to reconcile those employer contributions under 1.1, but I'll be honest, we have about 1,100 items that still need manual verification out of several 100,000 transactions that occurred during the period. And I will say, we think this is important. We want to reconcile these things going back. At the same time, we recognize, our agency's first priority is to deal with the people who are coming in every day today and addressing their issues as quickly as possible. On finding 2.1 on benefit payments, I'd say this is partially implemented. This is an issue of cross-matching with different data functions. A bunch of them were turned off during the conversion from the old system to the new system. We thought we had brought them all back online, but we found, in part through this audit work last fall, that 2 of the matching functions were only partially functional. So that is an IT system fix that we've been working on with our vendor, but it is taking more time and they have to do some additional testing to make sure it's actually fully functional. On finding 2.3 on the educational records, and this is one of the repeat findings, I would say we've addressed this in part We have a new system now, but there is going to be a perpetual issue of we are not allowed to sort of directly match UI data against educational records because of some statutory constraints for student privacy reasons. I will say that we do now, we ask for a self-attestation on education, and that creates an issue and we try to follow up on that. Of course, someone can be a student and still legitimately be eligible for unemployment insurance. That's not to say that individuals aren't eligible. So, but we have come up with some additional steps that we need to take to complete that, but we are very close on some of that verification. Finding 2.7 and 2.8 are the ones I mentioned that we're still part of negotiations with Bank of America, and I will do my best to answer. I will note that there are many lawyers involved in those negotiations, so they do have some concern about being too detailed, but and I'm sorry to say I'm not really sure what a good timeline is on this. It has been incredibly difficult to make progress with them, but we're working very closely with our Assistant Attorneys General to try to move forward. And finally, finding 2.9 refers to the another reconciliation issue. This is on the, I'm sorry, I'm going to get them backwards. This is the contributions one, right? Yes, this is the contributions one. So again, I will say, so this is the issue of, the funds were transferred over. It's not that and the question is, were all the employer contributions appropriately credited? And I want to assure the committee that even though we're still going through and manually doing this reconciliation, we hired 3 more accountants to help with this. We've cross-trained 5 additional individuals to address this backlog. Whenever there's an individual issue that comes up, like an employer saying, hey, my account wasn't credited, we can go in and address those individually. So with that, as well as the issue of, I think it's under 2.7 or 2.8, where an individual person might have said, wait, what happened? I never got, the credited unemployment insurance that I should have gotten because the account was frozen under suspicion of fraud. We go back and address those issues on an individual basis. So when people come to us, these are old systems problems, the reconciliation problems, but there can be occasionally individuals or businesses that are caught up in the system and it's had an impact on them. We pull those out when people have a problem and come to us and address them directly. Next slide. I think I've gone through most of these issues. Yes, I think so. Again, want to underscore that the audit has really allowed us to identify some areas that were in serious need of program improvement. And so we've been working on this.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I guess the only question I had really on Bank of America, and I know obviously they took a lot of heat in the middle of the pandemic. Do you feel like, well, let me ask this. Are we continuing to engage and use them for any services?
I don't believe we have any services with them. No. Okay. Yes, we moved to another bank provider for our other accounts and other issues. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure we weren't still working with them. Thank you. Delegate Block-Fitch-Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. I don't remember if this particular issue was part of either of the audits, but I'll just ask anyway, since it relates to UI. We still continue to hear from constituents who are stuck in the adjudication process, and that's still fairly lengthy. Can you just speak to what you've done on, the nearly year you've been in office on that front to improve that process for our applicants?
Yes, and actually EJ, if I might ask you to come up and speak a little bit more on the adjudications process, that would be great. I do want to say, a couple things leading up to the adjudication process. Something I observed is because of fraud, we are having a lot of individuals who are being asked to verify their identity over and over again. So there are multiple catch points where people are getting caught up. And I know it's very frustrating for you and your staff. There are a couple of things we've done. First of all, I want to make sure every delegate and senator is aware that, you have a dedicated person for you and your team to, send people to help resolve their issues, right? We have point people to do that. Second, we've recently implemented about a month ago a new form of electronic ID verification, sort of like, how you can take a picture of your check and deposit your check. What was happening before is we were asking people if there was any question about their ID, and even people who had their ID stolen had this happen. then they would send in an inquiry and we'd have individual staff manually verifying their IDs. It was taking days and sometimes weeks at our worst backlog. We've finally implemented an IT solution that at least will do that, for many cases, and that's going to release a lot of the backlogs. But additionally, we've also opened up more in-person service because we recognize not everyone has a smartphone and can do that. And also a lot of people are frustrated and confused by the system. And frankly, our Accenture call agents, they're on contract, and by law, there are a lot of things they cannot resolve. And so I'll get to that in a moment. Since we've reopened like kiosks in our main office at Labor downtown, for example, we some months have several hundred people walking in the door asking for help. So, one of the values of this administration is being responsive to constituents. We're also working with all our American Job Centers to train up staff there so they can help people with ID verification, because that is a lot of the volume that's coming in. EJ, do you want to say something to the adjudication issue in particular? I will say, just as a first note, I know a lot of the frustration is people call in during the pandemic. We've contracted with a lot of folks at Accenture to manage those frontline calls. We've provided a lot of training and updates to them, but under law, because they are not state merit staff, they cannot resolve people's issues. And that's a huge amount of the frustration for individuals. We are working to migrate away from that. We don't have a means to answer the phones ourselves because the state got rid of that system. So we are going on a procurement now to get our own system back, to be able to answer the phones ourselves, because that way, people are so frustrated when they get call once, they have to get referred to someone else. They don't hear back. They get a call back. They didn't pick it up. It's a huge amount of lost time and energy. And frankly, the contract's really expensive. So we are working on that, but it will probably be a 6 to 9 month period before we can hire that, get the contract in place and hire more of the staff. That should help with a lot of the adjudication issues. But EJ, do you want to add to that?
Yeah.
Other improvements we've made there?
Sure. Yeah, the implementation of True ID has been a big help, and it will help speed up the process because we don't start adjudicating the issues on the claim until we can actually verify the identity of the person, because we don't want to start adjudication on a fraudulent claim. And because that process was taking a long time, it was putting us behind in adjudication as well. So since we've implemented that, that will help speed up the process. And, the backlog of work is significantly down since the pandemic. During the pandemic, in like September of 2020, our backlog was around 150,000 adjudication issues for our claimants. And it's around 50,000 now. It's still higher than we want it to be, but it's much better. And we continue to work every week to get it lower.
Just briefly, when you have an update on those two that are TBD, if you could keep us posted on that, that would be appreciated. I know this is extended long, but I think we wanted to, one of the reasons that we're having you come back up here is to be able to have an update. And I think those two key findings we want to have an update on as well. I do find it intriguing that that you're not able to, the department is not able to personally answer those phone calls, that was contracted out. And so all the folks that are talking to the folks at Accenture, who are the contracted vendor to handle this, they can't actually solve any of those issues. And so that seems really incredibly frustrating that this was outsourced at an untimely time when there was obviously tremendous need.
I mean, obviously the volume at that time, we needed assistance. And during the pandemic, some of those constraints were waived temporarily. But it's been, I think, 2 years since maybe 3 years since that hasn't been the case. So, understand the reason for the decision at the time. And of course, there are, some people just have very basic inquiries that the call agents can answer. But at this point, especially with the low unemployment rate, most of the people who are calling have more complex situations. And so that really does need, experienced staff to respond.
No further questions. Thank you very much for, again, sticking around.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, we have an update from the Department of Budget Management, the Audit and Finance.
No, not
Oh,
really.
sorry. You're right. We have a report on follow-up process and repeat audit findings with Mr. Hook and Ms. Tamanis.
Slides. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an annual, December presentation. We make it every, joint audit committee in December. And it's a good segue actually to DBM, coming up because we're going to talk about the audit follow-up process and, repeat audit findings, which segues right into DBM. So this should be a good intro. So with me is Christine Timanis. She's an assistant audit director in our quality assurance and professional development division. Plus used to be an audit senior in afterlife or prior life. Sorry, not afterlife, prior life. I once an auditor, always an auditor. But anyway, Christine, please start.
Thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, Chair Lamb and Chair Solomon and committee members. OLA has various audit follow-up processes in place for repeat audit findings. And on page 2 of the presentation, we have provided an overview. Our analysis of fiscal compliance audits as of June 30th, 2023 includes the latest audit report for each agency subject to audit, generally every 3 to 4 years, and this represents our rolling audit cycle. As of June 2023, 27% of findings were repeated in the first subsequent audit. This percentage has been stable for the last 2 years. There are 2 follow-up processes in place for repeat audit findings, as discussed on page 3. On pages 4 and 5, we included some historical perspectives on the first follow-up process for agencies with 5 or more repeat findings. Page 6 shows there were 3 audit reports issued during calendar year 2022 that had 5 or more repeat findings. All 3 reports are subject to the quarterly status report process. On page 7 of the presentation, we provide background related to the JCR follow-up process. This process restricts fundings for agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings until the submission of a report by OLA on the status of the related corrective actions. As shown on page 8, the April 2022 JCR contained budget bill language restrictions for 3 agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings or significant findings. Based on OLA's review, the 3 agencies had not fully resolved the findings, with over half of the collective 15 findings still in progress. The budget committees did not release the restricted funds for these agencies. The April 2023 JCR contained budget bill restrictions for 4 agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings. OLA has requested status reports from each agency, and we will review these reports and report our conclusions to the budget committees. In addition to these agencies, there were budget language restrictions in April 2020, 21, and 23 for cybersecurity related findings. In conclusion, as discussed on page 9, we believe the various follow-up processes provide useful tools to compel state agencies to generally take meaningful corrective action to implement audit recommendations. There were some recent upticks in repeat percentages, but those percentages have begun to trend down again, as shown on page 1 of our exhibit. Within that exhibit, there are other summaries that Greg mentioned earlier in the day that summarize by type of findings. OLA will continue to monitor this trend and report to the committee.
I would like to add for the Department of Labor, Part 1, we will be starting that next audit next month. Department of Employment Insurance, sorry. Long day. Any questions? From the 4 remaining members.
Does not appear to be any questions. Thank you for compiling that information. We certainly appreciate it every year. Now we have an update from the Department of Budget Management, the Audit and Finance Compliance Unit. We have Ms. Joan Peacock, the Director of the unit, as well as Mark Nicole, the Deputy Secretary of DBM. You may proceed.
Good morning, Chair Lamb, Chair Solomon, members of the committee. My name is Mark Nicole. I'm the Deputy Budget Secretary. With me, I have Joan Peacock, who's the head of the Audit and Finance Compliance Unit, who will be making a presentation for you this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Lamb, Chair Solomon, and committee members that have stayed around for this long hearing. I thank you for the opportunity to share today the information of the work of our unit. Next slide. The unit was established in 2006 with the objective to provide a process to monitor the efforts of the executive units to ensure that repeat findings were being corrected. Historically, the unit has had 3 to 4 staff members that work with agencies. Over the last couple of years in fiscal year 22 and 23, we've expanded the unit and have added resources. The unit currently, as shown on this slide, has 10 positions. I do want to point out that we do have 2 vacancies. There's 2 audit compliance analysts that we are currently recruiting for. It has been difficult to hire qualified and experienced staff in these positions, but I am hopeful that we will hire them within the next few months coming up. I want to address an earlier comment about the quality of the staff and the ability to follow up on IT related findings. While we have not had certified IT auditors, we do partner with experts and have worked with the Department of Information Technology as needed to assist us in helping us follow up with the agency's efforts in those areas. And in fact, we've just hired a staff member that is a certified information systems auditor. And one of our vacancies, we are hiring an IT audit compliance analyst. With these additional staff that have this criteria, we do hope to expand the scope of what our unit does and focus more on IT related findings. At this time, we do feel that our staff is reasonable to accomplish the objectives and mission that we have. The next slide. I'm going to just overgeneralize and say that our unit provides support in 3 different areas. One of the areas is the audit compliant analyst work, that when they monitor corrective actions to ensure findings are being corrected. And they also provide ad hoc audit assistance to agencies. We also have our finance compliance team, which is the new portion of our unit. And they work with the Comptroller's General Accounting Division to provide training and technical guidance to agencies, budget and accounting staff. And then the last area is sort of like everything else. We do a lot of smaller functions. One of the things we do is administer the Internal Auditor Forum to provide training to internal auditors. And we also serve as DBM's internal auditor. Next slide. I know the committee is more interested in the work that we do with our audit compliance team with monitoring corrective actions. So I'm going to focus on that in the next couple slides. This slide here presents the audits that we use, the criteria that we use to determine which audits we are working with. We work with executive branch agencies that have 4 or more repeat findings, or those that have received an unsatisfactory rated audit, or agencies that reach out to us to request assistance. For all the audits that we're selected to monitor, the unit works with those agencies to monitor corrective actions until the legislative auditors begin their next fiscal compliance audit. During the course of working with the agencies, we work closely in partnership with their internal auditor or their compliance team. And that's usually who we work generally and have our day-to-day contact. But we do think it's important, and we always establish communication with executive leadership, the secretary's office and their team, to ensure that they are periodically updated with the status of the audit findings and correcting and implementing their corrective actions. I do want to point out and think it's important that this communication is critical, because it's ultimately up to the agencies to implement those corrective actions and to resolve their findings. Next slide. This next slide provides a little bit more detail of what our audit compliance team does when we work with agencies. I'm not going to read each of these bullet points for time's sake. I'm just going to highlight a few of the items. We do establish a periodic discussion of the corrective action plan. We think that's critical because that leads to focusing and making sure the agency is focusing on implementing their corrective actions. We also meet individually with those individuals that are responsible for implementing corrective actions or responsible for the issues. We are constantly providing objective assessment, recommendations and feedback. And we provide technical guidance. In certain instances, when we don't have that expertise, we will reach out to either other divisions within DBM, such as Office of Personnel or Central Collections, or we reach out to other agencies that have that expertise, like Department of Information Technology or the Office of State Procurement, as examples. And then depending on when the corrective actions are actually implemented and the workload of our audit compliance team, we will do testing of those resolutions to ensure that they actually did correct the issue. And just to emphasize, we are working with agencies until legislative auditors come back. The next slide. This slide here represents the 10 audits that we are currently working with agencies to monitor. Next slide, or 2 slides now. Next slide. And then this was a list of questions that we were provided in advance of this hearing that we understood that the committee wanted us to address during our presentation. I do want to, the first item or question that was on there was, I guess, based on the information that we had provided in our March 23 report. We had given some reasons for why repeat findings occur. One of those, or several of those reasons, related to staffing and resources. We do feel that that is a large area and a reason why that there are audit findings and repeat audit findings. I do want to make a clarification. We don't necessarily indicate or didn't want to indicate that the quality of staff that is working in the agencies is inadequate, but more that there were other issues such as vacancies, where agencies have difficulty recruiting and retaining quality staff, and then just areas where there is a lack of resources, so that their agency is unable to implement the controls or actually provide the program services that are needed. As to address this, our unit did expand and now has our finance compliance team that does work with agencies, and we do work with agencies that have vacancies. And that team does also work closely with the Comptroller's General Accounting Division, which we are aware of. They're in process of hiring an individual that is going to be implementing or starting up an accounting academy for state agencies, accounting offices, and we will be working closely with that individual. I believe the rest of the questions on this were addressed with information on earlier slides. The next slide, I think, is just contact information for us and the members of our team. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
So thank you. It's good to see you again. We did have some questions from Senator Hester that she passed along, that maybe she is not able to be here at this moment. But her question, the first one is, does the unit feel that it has the cybersecurity expertise that it needs? And notice that there were 2 vacancies that are still remaining to be hired. Could it be worked into those 2 remaining FTEs that are to be hired?
Absolutely. That is definitely, there is one of those vacancies is slotted actually for that type of individual that you're asking about. And I don't want to speak for the secretary or deputy secretary, but I can talk to them about getting that other vacancy as for an IT expert as well, audit expert as well.
And she had one additional follow-up question. Just given the number of cybersecurity findings, is there anything that you can do to ensure findings are deemed corrected, stay corrected until the next audit? What would the unit need to do to sample tests of completed corrective actions on cyber and PII more frequently?
That's I guess a loaded question. I think that we would first have to have the expertise available to do that testing. I believe I talked to Senator Hester after the last hearing, and I did tell her that I've talked to the Department of Information Technology to try to work with them as well on partnering sort of with them, especially a lot of the IT findings relate to enterprise agencies, which they are ultimately responsible for. So kind of establishing a communication with them and a program with them to make sure that we have them testing and verifying that certain security controls and that type of thing, firewalls, encryption, and all of that is being implemented and continue to stay in place.
There we go. Thank you for being here. It's my first time meeting with you all. So I had a question sort of more generally, and I don't know that it's necessarily applicable immediately to your office, but just given both of your incredible experiences with DBM and in audit offices, as we were talking about what happened with the Department of Health, on multiple different levels, one of the things that kept coming up in our analysis was obviously this was caught by the audits, by OLA in their regular audit procedure. But it seemed like a lot of the stuff, obviously November, when we were talking about the Office of the Secretary, that was even more front and center. But even the stuff that we talked about today with MCPA, these were things that happened every single year, that somebody at MDH was asleep at the wheel, or some element was not doing their annual check on it. And so I'm just kind of curious, absent the OLA process, which we know is every 3 years and obviously more targeted at agencies that have specific repeat findings, and that's partially what your team is responsible for. Who, in your estimation, or at what point was the ball dropped that somebody didn't catch this in the annual reconciliation process? Like, is it the state's the state's outside auditing firm that should have found it? Was it an internal accounting within the agency? How do we prevent something like this from happening so that it doesn't have to be uncovered by OLA? It should be something that at the end of the year, somebody within the agency or within the executive branch is saying, none of these accounts reconciled properly. What's going on?
So I think this kind of goes back to something that maybe was mentioned during the last hearing in November. If agencies have adequate and are constantly, the thing is they do have to constantly probably continue to update them, but standard operating procedures and written procedures, then something doesn't get lost in translation. Meaning when there is a vacancy and they're recruiting, and during that period of time when people are, staff is trying to fill in, they're just trying to keep operations going. Then they get filled that position. And then if with lack of, here's what exactly that position did and these procedures that they followed, sometimes things get dropped. And that's, I think, what one of the things definitely that happened at the, with the health department. But I think that, having that, those written procedures, standard operating procedures in place would help ensure that things do not get dropped or missed along the way. And when you have that in place, then I think you can better manage, management leadership can better manage and check off, were these things actually done? That would be my suggestion.
And,
Mark,
and I would add on to that by saying that really sort of maybe highlights the need for succession planning, right? So looking at your organization, seeing who your sort of key individuals are, and making sure that you have a plan for other existing staff in that organization to be sort of cross-trained and know what sort of the key personnel do, so that when that person leaves for whatever reason, that there is somebody to sort of step up into that role. And I do think at least a little bit of my sort of understanding, that's a little bit of what happened at MDH. You really had a sort of key person in their sort of fiscal compliance and auditing group that retired, and maybe we hadn't done a good enough job sort of getting that next person sort of ready to step up.
Sort of less talking about one specific office or personnel, or a position. I guess if somebody's account isn't reconciled appropriately at the end of the year, is there a check from DBM or somebody to say, as you're giving us your budget numbers, like these don't add up, so that it's not like a 3-year, or does the state have the state has a contract with an outside auditing firm, obviously, to look at their books. Is there, how does it get to a point where nobody outside the agency catches it until OLA goes in and actually looks at the records? That's, I guess, because these weren't things that happened one-off. It was like for 3 or 4 straight years, there were billions of dollars essentially, put in the wrong spot, and nobody caught it until OLA went in.
So I think in that particular instance, and the auditors are here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what was happening, what was being submitted to the general accounting division for closeout, it reconciled at what was being submitted because there was the revenue accruals were being booked. And where legislative auditors pointed out is when they asked for and looked for the supporting documentation related to that, that's where they, I guess, noticed that there was longstanding accruals. It wasn't the clearing accounts weren't being properly, revenue wasn't being properly allocated. We had longstanding, accruals. So whether or not, and when you flesh all of that out, do we still have, a deficit or money that we should have been drawing down from the feds? So I guess to answer your question, I don't think that it was that everything coming to either budget and management or the controller's office, it wasn't looking out of sync, if that makes sense. So there wasn't a way there to catch it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't see any.
Let me just add to that. The thing is, I think I know one of the things, I'll be honest with you, when my team looked at the revenue accruals, which is the script that they were running, like we could identify that there's definitely these old accounts and it should have been cleaned up. What comes to the general accounting division and what they're looking at is at much higher level. They're looking at the grant at a grant level, and it'll be I guess a combined process. So they're not seeing that underlying detail to identify that there is potentially an issue here. So.
Well, also, I might add, there's a timing issue too. This is closeout has to happen. Boom, boom.
Right,
boom.
right. And they aren't following up after like general accounting is not going to be following up after, accruals. They should be collecting that revenue, within a reasonable amount of time during the upcoming fiscal year. General accounting is not going to go back to the agency to ask them, have you collected this revenue?
All right. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last on the agenda is a summary of reports issued and recommended committee actions. We will bring forward Mr. Greg Hook.
It was interesting. Joan had a list of her employees. I think 5 of the 7 are ex-OLA employees. I think. Yeah, thank you, including you. Thank you. This can be very quick. This last document you have, it is 4 pages long, and all it basically says is that we issued 4 audit reports since the last hearing, which was through October 31st, and that we recommend one of those reports for a hearing, which is Medical Care Programs Administration, which we just did, and that's all this says. I will make one final statement, if I may, that people wonder if the auditors get audited, and the answer is yes, we do. And that this May, or next May coming up, May of 2024, the National State Auditors Association will be conducting a triennial peer review of Office of Legislative Audits. So 5 or 6 auditors from other state audit shops will be coming to Baltimore, and they'll be reviewing our processes and some of our audits we've conducted for compliance with generally accepted government auditing standards, which we have to comply with by statute. In the past, we've gotten a clean bill of health every time, and I'm knock on wood, hoping for the same. And with that, I'm done.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hook. Seeing no further questions or objections, we'll accept that. And we have reached the end of this hearing. Appreciate the members who are still here. I think we'll probably have a discussion, but we may in the future, and Mr. Hook, just for your awareness, break these up into smaller chunks so that we're not here quite as long. So we may have more frequent hearings in the future. So just a heads up on that. That's my closing remark.
I would say ditto, but thank you to the whole OLA team. Thank you for hosting us for a visit earlier last month. And thank you to all the members who stuck around.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Yeah, and thank you to the OLA team back here. I know you have brought a good number of folks back here. We appreciate all the work that OLA does. And so certainly extend our gratitude to all of you. Thank you. We're adjourned.